Nothing Everything, The Mind-Bending Philosophical Theory of Everything by Anubhav Srivastava, the audiobook Part 2. Why are specific physical laws? One of the most persistent questions in physics is, why these specific numbers? Why is the speed of light exactly 299,792,458 meters per second? Why not 300 million? Why not 5 miles per hour? Why is the gravitational constant exactly what it is? Scientists call this the fine-tuning problem. It seems like someone carefully turned the dials of the universe to these precise settings. If they were slightly different, atoms wouldn't form, stars wouldn't burn, and we wouldn't be here. This leads many to believe in a designer. They say, the odds of these numbers happening by chance are impossible, therefore it was built for us. But in the nothing-everything framework, this is a logic error. It is like a man winning the lottery and assuming the entire lottery system was built solely for him to win. The infinite dashboard. Imagine a dashboard with infinite dials. In a state of nothing with no limitations, there is no rule saying the speed of light must be 299,792,458 ms. There is no rule saying gravity must be weak. Because there are no rules, every possible setting of the dials exists somewhere. In Universe A, light travels instantly. In Universe B, light crawls at the speed of sound. In Universe C, there is no light at all. In Universe D, gravity repels instead of attracts. So why do we see this specific number? Because we are here. Our consciousness happens to be embedded in the specific slice or snapshot of the Omniverse where the dial is set to 299,792,458. If the speed were different, the physics of our brains wouldn't work and we wouldn't be here to ask the question. We are observing the conditions that allow us to observe. This is the anthropic principle weaponized by the Omniverse. The village in the mountains. To understand why this feels so normal to us, consider the Japanese village analogy. Imagine a remote village in the mountains of ancient Japan completely cut off from the rest of the world. They have no internet, no books from the outside, no visitors. To the villagers, speaking Japanese isn't a choice, it is the only way to speak. Eating with chopsticks isn't a cultural preference, it is the only way to eat. Their local laws are not seen as local rules, they are seen as the laws of nature. If you told a villager in another place called France people eat with metal forks and speak a different language, they would think you were describing a fantasy world. It wouldn't make sense, it would violate their definition of reality. We are that village. Our universe, with its specific speed of light and gravity, is just one tiny, isolated village in the infinite geography of the Omniverse. Our laws of physics are just our local customs. The speed of light is just our local dialect. The alien normality. And here is the mind-bending implication. In those other slices, the land-based realities to our fish reality, the rules might be so different that they look like chaos to us. Maybe cause comes after effect. Maybe time is a texture, not a flow. Maybe logic has 3 states instead of 2, true-false. To us that would look like madness. But to the consciousness born in that slice, it is perfectly normal. Just as the Japanese villager finds chopsticks intuitive and forks confusing, the entity in a non-causal universe finds non-causality intuitive and would find our linear time confusing. There is no why for the speed of light being what it is, other than because this is the slice where it is that. It is not a divine decree, it is not a fundamental constant of all existence. It is just the speed limit on our specific highway. And while it is the only road we can drive on, we must never make the mistake of thinking it is the only road there is. The traffic jam of the real world. You believe you are in the world. You feel the solid ground beneath your feet, you see the vast, open sky above your head, and you hear the symphony of a billion other beings living their lives alongside you. You call this the real world. This is the most powerful, most persistent, and most profound illusion you will ever experience. Let us return to our first principle, the bedrock of this entire book. The base reality is nothing with no laws, which by its very nature of having no limitations must lead to everything. This is not a mystical statement. It is a logical inevitability. A state of absolute nothing with no laws is a state where anything that can happen does happen timelessly. This means there are not just other planets or other galaxies, there are infinite realities, infinite configurations of existence, infinite universes, each with its own unique set of physical laws, its own history, its own inhabitants. So why do you think this is the only real world? You think this is the only real world because this is the real world your current instance of consciousness is experiencing. You are a driver locked in a car on a single highway in a single colossal traffic jam. The world you perceive, your culture, your laws of physics, your linear experience of time, the very thoughts in your head, is nothing but a feature of the specific lane you are stuck in. Imagine the entirety of existence is a planet completely covered in an infinite multi-laned highway with an infinite number of cars. This is everything. Each car is a single, conscious being. Each lane is a different reality with slightly different rules. You are in your car. You look ahead and you see an endless line of red taillights. You look in your rearview mirror and you see an endless line of white headlights. The cars around you are all moving at roughly the same speed. The drivers all seem to be subject to the same rules of the road. Aha, you conclude, this is it, this is the real world. It is a traffic jam on Highway I-95. But what you cannot see is that one lane over, the cars are not cars at all, they are beautiful, crystalline ships and the drivers are beings of pure sound. Their highway has different laws of physics. 10 lanes over, there is no highway. It is a vast, open ocean and the drivers are creatures that experience time backwards. A million lanes over, there is a reality where the Big Bang never happened and the concept of matter is a philosophical absurdity. You are not experiencing the real world, you are experiencing your traffic jam. The shared hallucination. But wait, you will argue, everyone else in my traffic jam agrees with me, the person in the car next to me also sees the red taillights, we are all experiencing the same reality, therefore it must be the one true reality. This is the final and most seductive part of the illusion. It is a literal shared hallucination. Of course, the other consciousnesses in your specific traffic jam of reality keep convincing you that your hallucination is the only real hallucination. You are all drivers on the same road, subject to the same rules, looking at the same stretch of asphalt. You are all trapped in the same beautiful, consistent, and limited slice of everything. It is a very convincing hallucination as it is shared by billions of other beings, but it is a shared hallucination nonetheless. And to truly understand the nature of everything, you must first have the humility to accept that the reality you have clung to your entire life is just one, single, beautiful, and infinitesimally small lane on an infinite road. A final nail in the coffin for a purely physical reality. Currently, it is assumed that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. But let's talk about a Google, which is 1,010,110,100, is an incredibly vast number compared to the estimated 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. To reach a Google, you'd need something far larger than all the particles in the observable universe, which are estimated to be around 108,1081,080 particles. Even the total number of stars in all the galaxies we can observe falls vastly short of a Google. Not only is the number of galaxies vastly smaller than a Google, but even if you counted each particle in every galaxy, you'd still fall short by many orders of magnitude. In short, 2 trillion galaxies don't come close to a Google, they're separated by a mind-boggling difference that's difficult to intuitively grasp. So, the infinite containment paradox wouldn't be resolved even if the universe were an unimaginably vast size, including a Google number of galaxies. A finite universe, no matter how large, would still need to be contained or framed by something else if we keep asking what lies beyond it. This leads to an endless chain of needing ever larger containers, pushing the problem back infinitely but never resolving it. However, the nothing-everything model gives a perfect resolution to this. In the nothing-everything model, infinite universes, configurations, and timelines are possible without requiring a container because they don't exist as concrete physical entities. Instead, they are more of holographic or dream-like manifestations. This sidesteps the containment problem entirely. What feels real in one universe, a linear progression of time, a measurable expanse of space, is just a local phenomenon. Outside these universes, the very concept of physical containment dissolves. While each universe may feel tangible to its inhabitants, its physicality is more like a crafted experience within the bounds of its specific rule set. So the resolution is that nothing is physically bound in the ultimate sense. Space and time are local phenomena, only relevant within individual manifestations. Let's give an example. A projection needs no containment, a billion of them can exist at once. Imagine a movie theater with a projector. The screen shows a movie, complete with characters, landscapes, and events. While it appears to be happening in three-dimensional space with time flowing linearly, nothing on the screen is actually physical. It's just a play of light and shadow, images projected in a flat, two-dimensional space. For an audience engrossed in the movie, the events feel real within that context. They're emotionally invested, reacting as if they're watching real life. But fundamentally, they're engaging with a projection, not something physically real or happening within the theater space itself. A billion different movies could theoretically be projected at once in different theaters without containing any of them in the sense of having a physical boundary. In the movie analogy, the mountain, the river, and the cityscape projected on screen don't actually exist as physical entities within the theater. They are representations, perceptions that feel real in the context of the movie but don't have the physical characteristics. In the nothing-everything model, each universe is ultimately like a projection. It feels real within itself with its own rules of time, space, and causation, much like a movie has an internal plot, scenes, and timelines. However, each universe is a configuration or manifestation, not a physical object in the way we think of physicality. No universe needs to be contained by something larger, just as the movie doesn't need to be physically contained within the screen or theater walls. Therefore, projection doesn't require containment. Each universe is like a movie playing, unbound by physical space. Infinite projections are possible without taking up space or time, because they are ultimately holographic in nature. Physicality is local. Inside each movie, things feel physical and bound by time, but from the nothing-everything perspective, they are transient configurations. Dreams are another analogy for how something can feel material and real without actually being physical. In dreams, we experience a world that feels just as tangible as waking reality. We can touch, see, hear, and interact with things as though they are solid and present. Yet, we know that everything in a dream is ultimately a projection of the mind and exists nowhere in physical space. In dreams, sensations and objects feel physical even though they're not. Touching a wall in a dream can feel solid, the environment has weight, depth, and even logical coherence at times. But upon waking, we understand that these experiences had no physical foundation, they were vivid projections made real by our mind but without material substance. Just as each dream has its own logic, each universe in the nothing-everything framework has its own self-consistent rules. In dreams, time might flow differently, we might fly, or objects might transform in impossible ways, yet it all feels coherent within the context of the dream. Similarly, in each universe or projection, local rules apply that feel natural to the inhabitants, even if they don't make sense outside that context. Just as a dream doesn't require physical space to exist, each universe doesn't require containment to exist within the nothing-everything framework. In dreams, our mind can produce an endless variety of worlds, characters, and scenarios every night. Each dream is its own contained reality, following its own rules, and one dream doesn't need to fit inside another. Just as our brain can project an entire, seemingly physical reality in a dream, nothing-everything can project universes that feel complete and material to their inhabitants, but are ultimately expressions of boundless potential rather than physical entities. The universe is expanding, so what is it expanding into? From the perspective of modern cosmology, we know that the universe is expanding. So the question is, what is it expanding into? The scientific view is that the universe isn't expanding into anything. Instead, space itself is expanding like a balloon. However, the infinite containment paradox yet again brings up a real philosophical problem, because When scientists use the balloon analogy to explain the universe's expansion, they often say that the universe isn't expanding into anything because spacetime itself is stretching. In other words, the universe is being stretched from within only. They think this answers everything. It does not. Because a balloon or anything physical cannot expand into nothing in any meaningful sense. Nothing cannot act as a framework for expansion because expansion implies there's something to expand into. A real balloon requires space to expand into. If it had no external space, it wouldn't be able to expand at all. It would literally burst immediately because expansion requires room. So, if the universe were a real physical object like the balloon in this analogy, it would similarly need something outside itself to expand into. The other possibility is that the balloon analogy is deeply flawed and the universe is not actually expanding in the way we think. This is where metaphysical explanations become necessary because the physical models hit a logical dead end. The solution: get rid of the concepts of space, time, and matter altogether when trying to understand the ultimate nature of reality. Because if we discard the idea that the universe physically expanding into nothing, then we're left with two possibilities. 1. The universe is literally expanding into something, which leads to the infinite containment paradox. 2. The universe's expansion is an illusion or mirage, which means the physical universe isn't fundamentally real. This would again imply that the physical universe itself isn't ultimately real in the sense of how we understand reality, but rather a projection or manifestation of some deeper reality. If the universe itself is a mirage, then what we experience as expansion might be a phenomenon that occurs within our relative experience of spacetime, but it isn't fundamental. By the way, no simulation theory can account for ultimate reality because of the same infinite containment paradox. Simulation theory suggests that our universe could be a simulation created by a more advanced civilization or in some other physical system. However, this doesn't solve the problem, it just pushes it back a layer. If we are in a simulation, then the simulating reality itself must exist within a larger framework, and we again encounter the infinite containment paradox. What contains the simulating universe? If it's physical, then what contains that? And if the simulating reality is part of another physical reality, we continue in an endless loop of physical containment with no logical endpoint. The only way to resolve the infinite containment paradox is to conclude that physical reality does not exist in the ultimate sense, at least not in the way we traditionally think of things existing. This means that the physical universe or any other physical reality, including the idea of us being in a simulation created by advanced beings, is not the foundational layer of existence, even though it could be an intermediate layer. The infinite containment paradox is thus a nail in the coffin to the idea of a purely physical ultimate reality. But of course, the universe clearly does seem to exist. However, at the same time, it cannot logically exist, not in the way we understand existence anyway. So what is really going on? Let's find out. Chapter 4: Can things exist and not exist at the same time? If something already exists independently, why would it need a cause to come into existence? If something doesn't exist at all, how could any cause bring it into being? Nagarjuna, ancient Buddhist philosopher. Nagarjuna was an ancient Buddhist philosopher who wrote the text, Madhyamakarika. In this text he is saying that if we examine the conditions, whether individually or combined, we cannot actually find the effect in them. He's challenging the idea that effects are somehow contained within their causes or conditions. For example, consider a plant growing from a seed. The conditions for the plant's growth might be the seed, water, sunlight, and soil. But if you look at these conditions individually, the seed, the water, etc., or even together, you won't find the fully formed plant in them. The plant doesn't inherently exist within the seed or any combination of conditions. His point is that effects are not inherently present in the conditions that supposedly produce them. If the effect in this case, the plant, is not already present in the conditions, the seed, water, soil, etc., then how could the effect arise from those conditions? If the effect is absent from the conditions, it doesn't make sense to say that the effect comes from them. This is a key part of his argument against the idea of cause and effect at the ultimate level. He's showing that if the effect is neither already present in the conditions nor arises independently from them, then causality as we typically think of it doesn't hold up. He's showing that cause and effect are not straightforward or inherent, and this is part of his broader argument about emptiness. Everything is empty of inherent existence, including conditions and their effects. Verse 12, however, if a non-existent effect arises from these conditions, why does it not arise from non-conditions? Here, Nagarjuna is presenting a hypothetical scenario. If we assume that an effect doesn't exist inherently within its conditions and it arises from these conditions anyway, we are left with a strange situation. It would mean that something non-existent, the effect, comes into existence from the conditions. This would imply that the effect somehow appears out of nothing, which is logically problematic. He's suggesting that if we accept the idea of effects arising from conditions, we have to confront the absurdity of something non-existent becoming existent just because of the conditions. If the effect is not already inherent in the conditions, then, Nagarjuna asks, why wouldn't it arise from something else, such as non-conditions? If the effect can arise from conditions where it was not previously present, what stops it from arising from anything, even things that aren't conditions at all? His point is that if we accept that an effect can come from conditions in which it does not already inherently exist, we might as well say it could come from non-conditions. In other words, if we can't explain how an effect arises from its conditions, then we can't limit its arising to only those conditions. It could arise from anything, which would undermine the whole idea of causality. This leads to the conclusion that causes and effects are not inherently existent in the way we think they are. Now let's move on to the next part. I hope you have a strong heart to handle this because Nagarjuna is going to literally shatter the concept of motion and ultimately you. Examination of motion 1. What has been moved is not moving. What has not been moved is not moving. Apart from what has been moved and what has not been moved, movement cannot be conceived. Where there is change, there is motion. Since there is change in the moving and not in the moved or not moved, motion is in that which is moving. Nagarjuna is saying that something which has already moved, i.e., completed its motion, is no longer moving. For example, if a car has already traveled down a road, it's not currently in motion, its movement has already ended. Thus, something that has been moved can no longer be described as moving in the present moment. What has not been moved is not moving. On the other hand, something that has not yet moved is also not moving. If a car is sitting still at the starting line, it's not moving either, so both the already moved and the not yet moved are not in motion. Nagarjuna points out that if we exclude what has already moved and what has not yet moved, we are left with no concept of movement at all. The categories of moved and not moved encompass everything, so if movement is not happening in either of these states, then motion as we conceive it doesn't seem to exist. Essentially, he's highlighting a paradox. We define motion as something happening in time, yet when we break it down into past, already moved, and future, not yet moved, motion doesn't seem to actually exist in either state. Nagarjuna is deconstructing the way we usually think about motion. His point seems to be that motion, like everything else, has no inherent independent existence. It can't be found in the past, something that has already moved, or in the future, something that hasn't moved yet, and even in the present moment, it's tied to the idea of change, which is itself fleeting and dependent on other conditions. In other words, if something has to move, it has to move from point to point. But one cannot cover several points in one instant. In one instant it is only at one point, and at the other instant it is at another point, but at no instant is it moving between points, so when did motion actually occur? Motion is the process of transitioning between points in space over time. In any given moment, an object can only be at one specific point. If we think of time as a series of discrete instants, then at each instant the object is only at one location, it can't be at multiple points at the same time. So at one instant the object is at point A, and at a later instant it is at point B. But these are just two separate snapshots of the object's position at different times. If we only have snapshots of the object being at specific points at specific instants, there's no clear way to identify when or how the motion is actually occurring between these points. Now, if an object is always at a specific point at any given instant, and at no single instant is it moving between points, then how can we say that motion actually occurs? When is the object actually in motion, if at every moment it's either at point A or point B but never in between? This leads to a paradox. We talk about motion as if it's a continuous process, but when we break it down into individual moments, it seems that motion doesn't actually happen at any specific moment. So, where is the motion? This leads to the conclusion that motion, as we conventionally understand it, doesn't exist in the way we think it does. In other words, we treat motion as something real and continuous, but upon closer examination, it's impossible to pinpoint a moment when motion actually exists. At every instant, the object is either in one position or another, but not moving. Nagarjuna's critique of motion is very similar to the way animation works. A series of independent, static images frames are shown in rapid succession, and when we view them quickly enough, they give the illusion of continuous movement. In reality, each frame is a still image, but our mind perceives the sequence of these still images as motion. In an animation, each frame is a separate, unmoving image. At any given moment, the screen shows only one frame, which represents a single instant. There is no actual motion within any individual frame. However, when these frames are played in rapid succession, the illusion of motion emerges. Our mind fills in the gaps between the static images to create a sense of continuous movement. Much like the illusion of motion in animation, what we call motion is really just our mental projection based on the relationship between different points in time and space. Motion, in this sense, is not something that exists independently or inherently in the world. It's a way we describe the relationship between different static moments, just like we describe animation as moving, even though it's made of still images. In both Nagarjuna's critique of motion and animation, the illusion of continuous movement arises from viewing a series of discrete, independent events or images. We think there's continuous motion, but when we break it down into individual moments or frames, we realize that there's no inherent movement in any of them. So we can say motion is basically an illusion of several snapshots, even in what we say is real life. In reality, just as an image can't literally jump from one piece of paper to another, an object in motion doesn't exist between discrete points or positions at any given moment. Instead, we experience a sequence of positions that we mentally interpret as motion. Similarly, in real life, an object appears to move from one point to another, but when we break this process down into discrete moments, or snapshots, we realize that at any specific point in time, the object is just at rest in a particular position. Motion, then, is a kind of conceptual illusion that arises when our mind links these discrete snapshots together. So, motion is not something real or inherent that we can observe at any single point in time. It's our mind's interpretation of the series of snapshots, much like how we perceive an animation as moving even though it's made up of still images. What does this mean for you and me? If I exist in multiple snapshots or static images creating the illusion of motion, then who the hell am I? Perhaps there is no I. Perhaps the illusion of the I itself is a representation or phenomena rather than an underlying reality in itself. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said you cannot step in the same river twice because the river is constantly changing, pretty much showing the concept of a constant anything is an illusion or at least illusion-like. And by the same logic, the concept of a constant you all your life is also an illusion. The you exists in moments, giving the illusion of a being like a series of drawings that seem to animate when the pages are flipped in quick succession. This brings us once again to the philosophical idea of phenomena and noumena as proposed by Immanuel Kant. Here is a quick refresher. Phenomena, these are the appearances or representations of things as we experience them. In this case, motion is a phenomenon, it's how we perceive and conceptualize the world. Motion appears real to us because it's how our mind organizes and interprets sensory data. Noumena, this refers to the things in themselves or the underlying reality that exists beyond our sensory experience. Kant believed that we can never directly know the noumenal world, what things really are in themselves, because we are limited by the way our minds perceive and interpret the world. In this context, you could say that motion is part of the phenomenal world, a representation that arises from how our mind interprets discrete snapshots of time and space. The noumenal reality, the deeper reality behind the appearances, doesn't necessarily contain motion as we perceive it. So motion could be seen as an illusion in the phenomenal world, something constructed by the mind based on its limited perspective. If motion and time are an illusion, what is the source of those illusions? Now, if we come to the conclusion that reality is an illusion, what is the source of that illusion? Illusion requires a creator, somethingness. If the world is an illusion, there must be something that creates that illusion. Even if reality as we experience it is just a projection of consciousness, similar to ideas in certain Buddhist schools or even simulation theory, there needs to be a projector, a source. Illusions don't pop out of nothing, they're generated. In other words, something needs to exist to even make the illusion appear in the first place. This breaks the idea of pure nothingness. Nothingness, the way we conventionally understand it, and that's the key part, cannot logically create the observable universe or even the concept of an illusion. It would lead to a complete void where not even the potential for existence could arise. Something must exist for existence to arise, and that's a paradox. Nothing and everything as a synthesis. Pure nothing leads to logical impossibilities, but a purely physical state falls into the problem of physical containment and infinite regress. Paradoxes aren't inherently illogical when we're dealing with the ultimate nature of existence. In fact, they're often the only way to describe realities that transcend our limited human ways of thinking. Look at quantum mechanics. Particles can be in multiple states at once, existing in a probabilistic cloud rather than a definite state. You can extend that kind of thinking to the nature of reality itself. It's not purely something because something needs to be contained and ends up in infinite regress, and it's not purely nothing because even an illusion requires a foundation, but it's both. Some say the universe has no edge but is rather a sphere, so there is no edge. They think that's a satisfying answer, but that's like saying Earth is a sphere. Okay, now so what? That sphere is contained within something. What is the universe contained in? And if it is contained within nothing, what the heck is it doing there? It doesn't address the deeper question of what contains the universe itself. The Earth is a sphere, but it's still contained within the vastness of space. Even if the universe is a four-dimensional hypersphere or something like it, the natural question remains, what contains that sphere? Just as the Earth has no edge but still exists within the solar system, even if the universe has no edge because it's a curved space or a sphere, a truly physical universe would still need to be contained within something. So, saying the universe has no edge doesn't escape the deeper question of what contains it. Further evidence that universe or existence cannot be a void nothingness in the conventional sense either. Interactions prove the existence of something, that causal interactions, whether physical, biological, or experiential, happen in the world. These interactions, such as pain from physical harm, reproduction from sexual intercourse, the transmission of diseases, or travel, demonstrate that things exist and have effects. Pain from injury shows that matter, nerves, brain, and energy pain signals exist and interact. Reproduction shows that biological systems interact to create new life, something that requires complex systems of matter, energy, and information. Infection transmission shows that microscopic entities like bacteria or viruses exist and can spread and affect other organisms. Travel demonstrates that space and movement exist even if logically impossible. Hopping on a plane means you're engaging with space and time in a way that has concrete effects. If the universe were pure nothingness in the way we understand nothingness, none of these interactions would occur because nothing cannot generate or support the existence of causes and effects. The very fact that things happen and cause observable outcomes proves that something is facilitating those interactions. Paradoxically, and here is the final point, something cannot exist in isolation. A something cannot be in the middle of nothing. A something needs to be brought into existence by something else, that something else by something else, and so on. The problem with something in isolation. Let's follow this line of thought. Suppose there is only one isolated something in the middle of nothingness, a solitary universe floating in a sea of emptiness. Why is it there? How did it get there? What surrounds it? When we examine it this way, we hit an infinite loop of questions. If it's there, why is it in this particular spot? What exists beyond it? What supports its existence in the middle of nothing? In other words, the age-old philosophical question, why is there something rather than nothing? The answer. This so-called puzzle arises because of our ignorance and a narrow view of reality. There is no something in isolation. There is only nothing and every apparent something is simply a part of that everything. Just like how a building doesn't float in thin air or an island cannot exist in the middle of the ocean without an underlying landmass, although the illusion of its existing alone is there. It rests on land, which rests on the Earth, which is part of a solar system, and so on. Any something seems to need a larger context to justify its existence. Let's be even more logical about this, weaving together arguments we have made previously. If we assume this is the only universe, we are forced to accept it as a brute fact. We have to say, the speed of light is exactly 299,792,458 ms. Gravity is exactly this strong, and the universe started exactly 13.8 billion years ago, just because. This is not an explanation, it is a surrender. It is like finding a perfectly constructed, complex castle floating in a void and saying, it has always been there. Our logic: an island implies a seabed implies a crust implies a planet. The physics, a specific set of physical laws, implies a mechanism that selected them. If there is only one mechanism and one outcome, it implies a designer God. If you reject a designer, you must accept infinite variety, Omniverse. Verdict: a singular universe without a God is a logical absurdity. It is a miracle without a miracle worker. But then God needs an explanation too. The Omniverse, infinite possibilities, is the only mechanistic explanation that works. It replaces design with inevitability. To the deconstruction to zero, first principles. If you peel back the layers of reality, matter is made of atoms. Atoms are energy. Energy is fields. Fields are math geometry. What is the math written on? If you stop at something, quantum foam, strings, membranes, you are still trapped in the loop. Where did the strings come from? The only logical stopping point is absolute nothing. Why? Because this nothing requires no components, it requires no fuel, it requires no space. But as we have showed, absolute nothing equals no constraints. No constraints equals infinite potential. Therefore, the only way to get something without magic is to start with nothing. Any theory that starts with something, like a singular universe, is starting in the middle of the story. 3. The fine-tuning trap. If this is the only universe, the odds of us existing are effectively zero. If the weak nuclear force were slightly different, stars wouldn't burn. If gravity were slightly stronger, the universe would have collapsed instantly. In a singular universe, we won the lottery on the first and only ticket sold. That is not science, that is faith. In the nothing with no limitations, infinite tickets, our existence is a statistical certainty. We are here because we couldn't be in the trillions of failed universes. The island is our experience, the standard model of physics. The ocean is the multiverse inflation. The landmass is nothing everything, the foundationless foundation. Nothing could lie beyond this everything, because it already includes every possible form and version of existence. And here's the key: if this everything truly is everything, then it must contain within it all possible forms of existence, things that seem to defy our usual understanding of logic. Any attempt to restrict it would mean it's no longer everything. So what we get is a logical spectrum that naturally runs from nothing with no existence to everything with all possibilities, and both of these states, nothing and everything, are complete and need no further explanation. This implies all possible universes, ours, others, every variation. All possible timelines, past, present, future, infinite. All possible experiences, real world, dream states and imaginations while awake. All possible patterns, random, ordered, chaotic, you name it. It means every possible version of existence has to exist somewhere, including ones beyond our understanding of logic or natural laws. This everything includes all these possibilities not because it needs or wants them or intentionally manifests them, but because at the ultimate nothing state there are no limitations, so there's nothing preventing them. There's no limit on what can be. This is the nothing everything idea, either pure absence or infinite potential, two sides of the same coin. It's both stunningly simple and all-encompassing, an ultimate answer that doesn't demand anything beyond itself. Nothing and everything are one and the same. Understanding what everything really means, no limits, no rules, no exceptions. If we're going to consider everything as the ultimate reality, then it needs to be absolutely complete. It can't have restrictions, limitations, or caveats. It must allow for all possibilities because if it excludes anything, it's no longer everything. It would just be another something within a larger system. So this everything has no boundaries or rules. It doesn't exclude any possible state or reality, because to do so would make it incomplete. It contains all things that can possibly exist, from the smallest particle to the most expansive universe and everything in between. In this framework, everything includes all configurations, every possible timeline, every possible universe, every possible state of being. If there's even a single exception, it's no longer everything. It's just another limited reality that itself needs further explanation. Now think about our universe. It's vast, but it has boundaries, physical laws, constraints, a beginning, and presumably an end. Our universe is a something because it's limited. It has rules that things must follow, laws of physics that govern how matter and energy interact. This makes our universe as grand as it is just one small part of everything. Our universe, with its specific laws, is like one frame in a film strip of infinite frames. There's a pattern, a structure here, but it's not the whole story. Our universe is part of a larger context, one of infinite possible configurations that together make up everything. Here, where it all comes together, imagine that we ask, what lies beyond our universe? If our universe is something limited, then logically there has to be more beyond it. Perhaps it's one among many or part of an even larger structure we don't fully understand. If we trace this what's beyond question far enough, we only escape the infinite regress by finally reaching a state that is either nothing or everything or both. The only rule of this nothing everything is that overall there are no rules. It allows for all things, all possibilities, all realities because there's nothing to restrict it. Every configuration, every potential universe, observer, timeline, or state of being is part of this everything. However, it is when you experience reality from within localized universes with laws such as ours, rules apparently seem to emerge. Our universe, then, is one of these countless possibilities, a something that exists within the boundless framework of everything. And in this way, everything becomes the simplest and most complete answer to the puzzle of existence. Everything happens because there's nothing to prevent it. It's the only logical resolution to the puzzle of existence because a true everything, by definition, needs nothing beyond itself to exist. This model is the simplest and most logical philosophical theory of everything. It's a foundational perspective that underpins why any reality can exist at all. The only reason we question why this and not that is because we're used to living in a universe with rules. In our daily lives, laws of physics, cause and effect, and limitations are facts of existence, but these constraints are just one part of the greater whole. This perspective brings us to the idea that the simplest answer is often the most powerful, and while this simplicity is beautiful, it's also complete. Nothing everything is the only possible way to resolve the mystery of existence without imposing arbitrary rules, limitations, or unanswered questions. We're part of an infinite set of all things, living out one possible pattern among infinite others. There are infinite timelines, infinite configurations, and infinite universes as part of a single, boundless whole. Each of these realities, our universe, your experiences, my experiences, and countless others, exists within this infinite set of possibilities. This dual state is non-dual in the sense that it transcends the binary concepts of existence and non-existence. It's a state of being that isn't tied to our traditional understanding of physical existence or nothingness. How does unlimited potential arise in a nothing? Because it is not nothing as in a pure void. It is a nothing with no laws and no limitations, paradoxically leading to a state with a potential for literally everything imaginable, unimaginable, and more. Now some may ask, how can a nothing everything produce everything there is? The answer is that it can, just like a piano with basically 7 notes can literally produce close to infinite compositions. A piano has a finite set of 7 notes, but the combinations of those notes and the ways they can be arranged can produce an almost infinite number of compositions. Similarly, nothing everything might seem like a simple, neutral state, but within it lies the potential to produce an infinite variety of outcomes. Just like the limited notes on a piano can give rise to complex and unique pieces of music, nothing everything can probabilistically manifest infinite realities from its state of potentiality. This conveys the idea that complexity doesn't necessarily require an infinite starting point. It can emerge from simple, underlying structures like the 7 notes. Just as the same 7 notes can be used to create compositions that are light and harmonious or dark and dissonant, nothing everything can manifest realities that vary from our physical universe to an infinite number of other realities, some that might seem familiar and others that could be radically different. Just as a piano can produce new compositions endlessly, nothing everything can continuously generate new realities without running out of possibilities. There's no limit to how many universes, realities, or manifestations can emerge from nothing everything, just as there's no practical limit to how many combinations of notes can be played on a piano. But here is the catch: in a time-bound world such as ours, such infinite compositions would unfold and be created sequentially over an equally infinite length of time. However, in a reality that is timeless, these compositions do not need to be sequential and unfold in time like our reality. They can coexist all at once. In nothing everything, such configurations do not need to unfold sequentially. They can exist together, projected by a state that is ultimately timeless. So all compositions, all universes, all possibilities already coexist in a timeless, causeless state. The structure is less like a piano with sequential potential compositions and more like an infinite field where every possible composition is already complete, existing outside any need for sequencing or progression. In other words, every possible expression exists within nothing everything timelessly and non-sequentially, not as something that has to unfold in time but as an already complete reality. So, while the piano analogy works up to a point, the true nature of nothing everything transcends even that, holding all that is and can be in a state of infinite, timeless co-presence. It's as if potential and actuality collapse into one and every possibility simply is. There's no waiting for the next note because in nothing everything all notes are already played and yet none are needed. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence becomes timeless co-occurrence. 1. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. Imagine Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, trying to make sense of the nature of existence. He comes up with this challenging idea, eternal recurrence. In simple terms, he's saying, what if everything you experience will happen over and over forever, exactly the same each time? This was pitched as a philosophical idea by Nietzsche to ask yourself if you would be willing to live such a life over and over again, but he literally believed this was an inevitability. In unpublished notes, he even tried to work out the logic of why this eternal recurrence was inevitable. Why you had to live your life over and over and over again for eternity. Because eventually all the atoms that composed you and all the atoms that composed the events occurring to you, those patterns just had to repeat again and again for eternity. But here's the catch: for this eternal recurrence to be possible, you'd need an eternal universe. Yet if our universe had a beginning like in the Big Bang, it may also have an end. This boundary breaks Nietzsche's idea because something with a definite beginning also has to have a definite end. So Nietzsche's eternal recurrence stirs up fascinating thoughts but doesn't quite fit with a finite linear timeline, at least the way we understand it and the way he described it. 2. Poincaré's recurrence theorem. Now let's fast forward to Henri Poincaré, a mathematician who tackles this problem from a scientific angle. He developed something called the Poincaré recurrence theorem. Imagine you have a finite system with a fixed amount of energy, like a collection of particles in a box. Poincaré's theorem says that if you wait long enough, the system will eventually return to a state very close to its starting point. So if the universe is finite and closed, it might reassemble into a nearly identical state after an incredibly long time. But here's a key difference from Nietzsche. Poincaré's recurrence doesn't mean exact repetition. The system won't reset perfectly, it'll just come close with slight differences each time. Think of it like a repeating song that sounds a little different on each replay because the universe has countless tiny variables. So, Nietzsche imagines exact eternal repetition, but Poincaré gives us approximate recurrence. A system where things get close but never exactly repeat, like a movie where scenes keep returning but with slight changes each time. 3. Why these ideas struggle in a finite, time-bound universe. Both Nietzsche's and Poincaré's ideas bump into a problem. They depend on a universe without an end. But if the universe has a finite amount of time, or if time has a beginning and potentially an end, true eternal recurrence or even close repetition becomes impossible. Once time is finite, any return to previous states becomes less likely, if not impossible. It would be like expecting a movie with a definite start and end to loop back to the beginning on its own. Eventually, the movie just finishes. So, for true eternal recurrence or an endless cycle of similar states, we need something that isn't confined by time at all. For beyond time, the idea of timeless co-occurrence. Now imagine a reality where time doesn't exist as we know it. In this model, the universe doesn't need to loop or repeat because all possible versions of reality exist simultaneously. Instead of a sequence where one thing follows another, every possible reality just is, side by side with all other realities at once. This concept, let's call it timeless co-occurrence, removes the need for repetition or cycles. Picture it like this. Instead of watching a movie that could rewind and replay, imagine a giant, infinite mosaic of every frame of every possible movie laid out before you. Each frame is slightly different, but all frames exist together. You're not waiting for one frame to change to another because all frames, all possibilities, already exist side by side. So unlike Nietzsche's eternal loop or Poincaré's gradual return, this idea of timeless co-occurrence means that every possibility, every variation is happening all at once. Every choice you might make, every slight difference in every reality is all there, not needing time to unfold because they all simply exist as part of a larger timeless whole. Variations among possible universes range from the smallest, almost imperceptible differences to vastly divergent forms, allowing an extensive range within nothing everything. Even universes nearly identical to ours could coexist, with tiny alterations like different atomic positions, creating an interconnected web where probability supports a spectrum from the mundane to the extraordinary. These slight variations prevent reality from collapsing into a single, cyclical loop by fostering constant evolutionary divergence. 5. Why timeless co-occurrence works as a solution. This idea of timeless co-occurrence can solve the issues in Nietzsche's and Poincaré's models because there's no need for the universe to loop or wait for time to unfold. Every version of every moment already exists. All variations happen simultaneously, they're not limited by time or cause and effect. It's not an endless loop but an endless collection of realities like pages of infinite books, all side by side. Think of it as a cosmic library containing every possible story, each story existing independently, timelessly. In this model, recurrence isn't about repeating the same events. Instead, it's about all possibilities coexisting in their unique forms with each version having subtle differences. So if Nietzsche's eternal recurrence and Poincaré's recurrence theorem rely on cycles within time, timeless co-occurrence removes the need for time altogether. In this view, all realities, every slight variation, every potential outcome, simply exist together even if they are compartmentalized in a way that they aren't accessible to each other. This is a different way to look at existence. Instead of things returning or recurring within time, all that can exist already does, in a timeless, infinite state where all possibilities unfold beyond the limits of time and sequence. Events don't unfold in a linear fashion, but exist in a state of simultaneous potential. This timeless state accommodates Nietzsche, eternal recurrence, but shifts it to a timeless co-occurrence with infinite infinitesimal variations. The shocking conclusion: if energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. Let's start with the fact that is, at the very least absolutely true in our version of the universe, the idea that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It is the second law of thermodynamics. This isn't just some scientific fact, it's a doorway to understanding the deeper nature of reality. If energy has never been created, it has no starting point. If it can't be destroyed, it has no end. That means energy has always been there and it always will be. Now think about that for a moment. Everything in our daily experience seems to have a beginning and an end. A tree grows from a seed and eventually dies, rivers form and dry up, people are born and pass away. But energy doesn't follow this pattern. It doesn't need to be caused or created. It doesn't come from anywhere or go anywhere, it's just there. Why causation and time are linked. Next, let's think about causes. For something to be caused, there must be a sequence. First, something happens, the cause, and then something else follows the effect. A tree grows because a seed was planted. A car moves because someone turned the key. This sequence depends on time. Without time, there's no before and after, so there can't be causes in the way we normally understand them. But energy breaks this rule. It exists without a cause, and if something exists without a cause, it exists outside the flow of time. There's no need for a before or after. That's why the ultimate reality must be timeless. What does timelessness mean? When we say timeless, we don't mean eternal. Eternal means something lasts forever, but it's still stretched out over an infinite amount of time. Timeless is different. It means there's no time at all, no past, no present, no future as separate things, everything just is. Imagine holding a book in your hands. The entire story, beginning, middle, and end, is right there all at once. You can flip to any page, but every page already exists together. Now imagine you're inside the story, reading it page by page. You'd experience the events as if they're happening in a sequence, one after the other. But from the perspective of someone holding the book, the sequence is just an illusion. All the events coexist. That's what timelessness is like. From our perspective, we experience time as flowing yesterday, today, tomorrow, but from the perspective of the ultimate reality, everything, every moment exists all at once. Now let's bring this back to life and death. We think of life as a journey with a clear starting point, birth, and a clear endpoint, death. But this view depends on the flow of time. If time itself is just how we perceive reality, then life and death are also part of that illusion. Imagine a wave on the ocean. You might see the wave rise, crest, and fall, and you could think of its birth as when it first formed and its death as when it disappeared back into the sea. But the wave was never separate from the ocean. It was always just a movement of water taking on a temporary form. The wave didn't really begin or end, it was always part of something larger. In the same way, what we call life and death are just forms energy takes. They feel like beginnings and endings because we're stuck in a perception of time. But from the perspective of the ultimate reality, the timeless reality, they're just transformations in an unchanging whole. Life and death are like waves on the ocean of existence. They seem separate for a moment, but they're never really apart from the greater whole. What this means for us. So what does all of this mean? It means that life as we experience it is only part of the story. The things we think of as absolute, birth, death, beginnings, endings, are just part of how we see the world, not how it actually is. In the grand scheme of things, there is no start or end, only the timeless reality where everything already exists and gives the illusion of repeating itself again and again and again. In summary, energy doesn't need a cause, so it exists outside of time. Without time, past, present, and future coexist. What we experience as a sequence is an illusion. If there's no time, past, present, and future all exist together. Life and death, which depend on time, are illusory in the grand scheme of things.